Having been married to a human rights lawyer for 28 years, we've had a lot of very interesting house guests, from, exiled prime ministers to banned poets to prisoners on the run. They're all staying up in my attic. And one of the people who stayed there for a while was Julian Assange when he came to see my husband for legal advice. So I got to know Julian very, very well. And what I picked up about him, I know he's a very controversial character. And one of the reasons he's so controversial is that people misread him. I think he's on the autistic spectrum. Now, I have a son with autism, so I have an autism radar for these things. And as you know, autism is a lifelong neurological condition. And its chief characteristics are an inability to socialise and communicate, often chronic OCD and anxiety, but also often an incredibly high IQ. And Julian Assange is like Wikipedia with a pulse. He's so clever, as a lot of computer geniuses are. But it also means his social skills are quite inept. He's misread as being taciturn and abrupt and single-minded and egocentric, etc. But really, this is just describing someone on the autistic spectrum. So I feel for him being in this situation at the moment where people are abusing him and putting him down his personality all the time, where actually he has, I think, a condition which we need to understand.
So you think that awkwardness has counted against him?
I think the awkwardness has counted against him, that he rubs people up the wrong way, even people who were allies like The Guardian and the New York Times and in the embassy, the Ecuadorians. They're just misunderstanding him. He's not being rude and taciturn. He actually has a psychological, neurological condition called autism. He's very high functioning on the autistic spectrum, I think. And there's a lot of men out there walking around who are undiagnosed. It's 1 in every 68 people. And especially it comes down through the male line. So, anyone who's watching, if your partner or your husband is a train spotter or a plane spotter or a computer obsessive or his emotional bonsai, and you have to whack the fertilizer on to get any feelings out of him, there's a very good chance that he's on the autistic spectrum, just undiagnosed.
As a friend,
Yeah.
what do you feel about what's happened to him in the last 24 hours, and what is coming his way?
Well, I think we should all be worried about what's happening. I mean, yesterday when he came out of court, what he said was, "I told you so." And the very reason he went into the Ecuadorian embassy is that he was so worried about being extradited to America from Sweden. They have a very strong extradition treaty with America, as does Britain. And I think for any of us should be worried about this, because to extradite a journalist to America for publishing information from whistleblower, what sort of message does that send out to? It sends out the message that journalists are not safe anywhere in the world. So, he should fight this vociferously, and he will. And we should also back him. As Jeremy Corbyn said yesterday, publishing the atrocities of what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan was very brave, and we should praise him for that. Not that I've agreed with everything he's published and everything he's said, but I definitely defend his right to say it and publish it.
But a lot of opinion went against him with the Swedish allegations. That's what a lot of people can't stomach.
Well, of course, and as a feminist, I'm torn on all of that, of course, but he wanted to face up to the charges and clear his name. But the reason he couldn't go back to Sweden is that he was so worried about being extradited to America. Once he disappears into the American legal system, he could be incarcerated for decades. We will never, ever hear from him again, and his freedom will be will just be jeopardised for life. So he was worried about that. Yeah, but as I said, in Sweden, the case has been dropped and no charges were ever really laid. So,
on the embassy, the new Ecuadorian president was saying he was a bad house guest. He didn't play by their rules, and that's why they invited the police in. Well, what do you know about that? What can you tell us about that?
I think that from what I gather, they made his life very difficult. I mean, I visited him quite a few times at the embassy over the years, and with varying degrees of welcome, depended which government was in Ecuador. But it was always pretty tricky going to visit him. And in the last year, they took away his internet, they took away his phone, they made it impossible for friends and colleagues and lawyers to visit him. I mean, they made it very clear that he was an unwanted guest.
Obviously, a lot of people watching this won't have much sympathy for him, but how bad was it for him in there? Can you give us a flavour of what his day was like?
Well, he's been incarcerated in there for 7 years, really, with no sunlight. He's had no access to friends. It's been very socially isolating. It's been damaging on his physical health and his mental health, of course. But nothing will be as bad as being sucked into the American legal system, from which he may never ever reappear. So clearly, Julian Assange's fears of extradition to a US court have been absolutely justified. But there have been two Britons who've been charged with similar hacking offences, and they have used the British court system to stymie extradition to the USA, Laurie Lee and Gary McKinnon. So, there is precedent, and I just hope that, the British government will actually back him and protect the rights of journalists to publish.
The judge yesterday saying he's narcissistic and knew exactly what he was doing. But there's this grey area here, isn't there, where you think it counts against him that he comes across as maybe arrogant or whatever. Yeah,
I think the judge yesterday saying that he was narcissistic is a typical misreading of an autistic person. People with autism, they can be single-minded, obsessive, they can seem totally unaware of other people's feelings and emotions, and also how they're affecting other people. And it's not that he's trying to be rude or hostile or arrogant. It's just that he's, I think, on the autistic spectrum. He's a high-functioning autistic person, and their social skills are really inept. They're brilliant in lots of other ways. We now know that Mozart and Einstein and Orwell and Van Gogh were on the autistic spectrum. None of those people were socially able, but they did have incredible, other sorts of incredible gifts. So, I think he should get a diagnosis, because I also think that it would help his court case and would help people understand his particular personality traits.
He has a hard core of supporters, but a lot of this, over the years, a lot of supporters have sort of drifted away.
Yeah.
He comes across as quite a hard person to like.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Well, part of the reason a lot of his supporters have drifted away is that he can be so taciturn and abrupt and seemingly selfish and single-minded and lacking in empathy, which has alienated a lot of his supporters and friends, including me at times. I've had a lot of fights with him. In fact, the biggest argument we ever had was about the fact that he hadn't read any books by women writers. And he had this idea that perhaps female authors were inferior. So when he was in Wandsworth Prison, this must be back in 2010 or 11, I think, I sent him in a big box of books by Jane Austen, the Brontes, all my favourite female authors, and said, now that you're a captive audience, read these books. And of course he read them, and he was completely converted to women writers. But he's very easy to argue with and fight with. And I was totally against him releasing the Hillary Clinton emails, for example, because it led on to Trump. But he's a publisher, and he has published some incredibly important material on atrocities in Iraq and in Afghanistan. And we have to have whistleblowers to hold government to account. So, he's done good, he's done bad, he's controversial, what can I say? But I do defend his right to publish.